which said that the two aforementioned presidential reports are correctly understood as political statements of nations, the Trilateral Commission, and the International Monetary Fund to pursue policies that will not result only in the death of the 120 million cited in the report, but in the death of upwards of 2 billion by the year 2000. Throughout the world, the Club of Rome has indicated that genocide should be used to eliminate people who they refer to as useless evil. By using limited wars in advanced countries and even a limited nuclear strike at a strategic location, starvation through created famines and diseases in the third world countries. This echoed an earlier plan in 1961. Robert McNamara, McGeorge Bundy, and Dean Rusk, all CFR members, were concerned that there were no studies concerning long-term plans for peace, and they wanted to study the direct and indirect ramifications of war. Since then, some have speculated that the think tank known as the Hudson Institute actually conducted the study, started by Herman Kahn in 1961 to help determine the entire future of the U.S. His secret report, which wasn't released until September 1966, known as the Report from Iron Man on the Possibility and Desirability of Peace, appeared to be a blueprint for the future of this country, and contained recommendations that included plans for governmental control and manipulation, depopulation, gun control and disarmament, and an international police force and concentration camps. This report also made this observation: war has provided both, and I quote, "War has provided both ancient and modern society with a debatable system for stabilizing and controlling national economies. No alternate method of control has yet been tested in a complex modern economy that has shown it is remotely comparable in scope or effectiveness. War fills certain functions essential to the stability of our society until other ways of filling them are developed, the rationale behind their actions." And I quote, "There will be no peace in the tormented world, only a programmed and systematic series of wars and calamities until the plotters have gained their objective, an exhausted world willing to submit to a planned Marxist economy and total and unique enslavement in the name of peace." End of quote. Are there plans for genocide already started? I'm referring to disease known as AIDS, acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, which has become a plague in our society, spreading to 91 nations. The U.S. News and World Report stated a few years ago, if there is not a cure for AIDS within the next 13 years, tens of millions of people will die. Even though there has been a lot of talk about AIDS awareness and prevention, the full danger of it has been covered up by the Center for Disease Control and the media, which has increasingly shown its pro-homosexual bias. In the 1972 bulletin of the UN's World Health Organization, Volume 47, page 251, it says, and I quote, "An attempt should be made to see if viruses can in fact exert selective effects on immune function. The possibility should be looked into that the immune response to the virus itself may be impaired if the inflicting virus damages more or less selectively the cells, so as it being discussed by a health organization. Derivatives from sheep and cattle have commonly been used to manufacture vaccines. However, certain viruses common to these animals can interact indefinitely, forming a new strain of deadly viruses called retroviruses. In 1974, the National Academy of Sciences recommended that scientists through the world join with members of this committee in voluntarily deferring experiments linking animal viruses. A gastroenterologist with a PhD in pharmacology who was hired as a consultant to work on a health care proposal for Security Pacific Bank. said, and I quote, "I don't think there is any doubt that AIDS is a man-made problem. The question is whether it was created accidentally or intentionally. I believe the AIDS virus was requested, predicted, produced, and deployed." End of quote. The most common theory about the origin of AIDS was that it came from green monkeys in Africa. The AIDS virus does not occur naturally in any animal. Besides, it would have been statistically impossible to reach the point we are at now just from one single episode. If the AIDS virus had originated with the monkeys, then the disease would have surfaced with the pygmies who are closer to them and used them as a food source. Yet, it appeared first in the cities. Further damaging evidence comes from the fact that AIDS practically occurred simultaneously in the United States, Haiti, Brazil, and Central Africa. Strecker's research indicated that the AIDS virus was developed by the National Cancer Institute in cooperation with the World Health Organization in their laboratories at Fort Derrick, Maryland. In the U.S. Army's Germ Warfare Unit, known as the Army Infectious Disease Unit, by combining bovine cow leukemia virus and Visna sheep virus and injecting them into human tissue cultures. The bovine leukemia virus is lethal to cows but not to humans, and the Visna virus is deadly to sheep but not to man. However, when combined, they produce a retrovirus that can change the genetic composition of cells that they analyze as the genes of the human AIDS virus and the genes of the bovine leukemia virus of cattle and the Visna virus of sheep and compares them. The gene appears related. How is it possible that the bovine Visna virus, which looks like AIDS and produces an AIDS-like disease and which produced cystis coronae pneumonia in chimpanzees in 1972, has not been analyzed and compared with AIDS until 1987, when characterization and molecular cloning of bovine lenten, Latin for slow, virus related to human immunodeficiency virus was published in Nature magazine. Matthew Gonda, the author, described a virus that looks like AIDS, named bovine Visna virus, and suggested that it was most closely related to AIDS. In May 11, 1987, the London Times ran this article called "Smallpox Triggered AIDS Virus," written by science editor Pierce Wright, who linked the mass vaccination program of the World Health Organization in the 1970s to the outbreak of AIDS. Because Central Africa was the focus of the program, and they had become the most affected area in the world. In Africa, AIDS is generally a heterosexual disease, yet in the United States it is a stigma of being a gay disease. In 1978, there was no sign of the AIDS virus, yet in 1978, the killer disease struck with a vengeance within the homosexual community. The evidence points to the introduction of an experimental hepatitis B vaccine. In 1969, Dr. W. Schmugner, a Polish physician who was educated in Russia, came to the United States, where he became the head of the New York City Blood Bank. He set up the guidelines for a hepatitis vaccine study, and only promiscuous males between the age of 20 and 40 were included into the study, which has led some to believe that this was how the virus was introduced into the gay population. In the case of the hepatitis vaccine, which is not produced from human tissue culture, it is impossible to have an accidental contamination, which seems to indicate that the AIDS virus was intentionally put in the vaccine. In 1981, the Center for Disease Control reported that 6% of those receiving the hepatitis vaccine were affected with AIDS. But in 1984, they admitted that it was actually 60%. These hepatitis vaccine studies are now in the possession of the Justice Department in Washington, D.C. To allow the disease to become entrenched within the population, various facts were covered up and glossed over. A great deal of emphasis has been put on the prime cause of AIDS infection, being the exchange of bodily fluid through sexual activity and intravenous drug use, which has brought a campaign for the importance of using clean, unused needles and condoms. The use of a condom does not guarantee protection against the transmission of the AIDS virus.